Oh, by the way, I should mention, we found, and you have their bios, so I won't go through those individually. We found the best way to get the most questions answered is to actually text them in. So if you want to text questions in, and I know that we'll have more than we can answer, I'll pick and choose some of those questions that we can ask the panelists, but I'll definitely be starting the discussion off. So, Mark, Alex, thank you. I will tell you, one thing we do for our students is we do these behavioral profiles. Can everyone hear me okay? Good. I had the chance to do a profile of all of these individuals, and the outcome was very interesting because several of them are uniquely alike, and some are uniquely different. And as we talk through what it means to be an entrepreneur and how you assess risk, I think we'll see those different traits come out in the individuals. So Alex, I'm going to start with you, and the others I want to jump in as well. Define for us what an entrepreneur means to you, and whether you think of one.
Okay, so I'll answer the second part of that question first, and I do believe I'm an entrepreneur. To me, an entrepreneur is somebody that has a vision, does a lot of planning around it, but the most critical part is that they execute and make the jump to make it happen. There's lots of components to running a company successfully. You have to have the vision, you have to put the right team together behind it, you have to be able to track that team and move it forward, keep the goal on it forward. And a lot of people do that in their day jobs, and then there's the management aspect of, not only managing to a budget, but setting a budget, but then having P&L responsibility, which I never had P&L responsibility before I started my company. And then sort of the ultimate responsibility of the entrepreneur then is then you've got the responsibility of actually making payroll, right? And the incredible responsibility that comes from being, from having a team of people behind you that are relying on you to make the right decisions.
Mark, you can ask the second question first, too. You think an entrepreneur, and how do you define it?
Well, maybe the first two. I think the difference between just being an entrepreneur and being a good or great entrepreneur is really the distinction. An entrepreneur is willing to take the risk, is willing to step out and out of their comfort zone, start something new. And then I think the difference between just that versus the great entrepreneur is the one that, I think as Alex mentioned, who thinks it through, who has the right vision, who has the right plan, who actually will take the time to assure that they have that plan in place. There's always going to be risk there, but you want to minimize the risk. I think going back to the second part is, and maybe with me personally, is I think maybe I'm not the traditional entrepreneur of doing a million different things. I started a company with a very specific disciplined plan and a vision that now I've stuck to for almost 30 years. And again, did not get distracted by other options, as kind of a apartment, syndicator, manager. Many times people come to me and say, why are you building? Why are you doing condo conversions? Why aren't you in the East Coast? And my response always is, we've got our plan, we've got a discipline, we know what we're doing, we do it well. And I think sticking to that isn't necessarily always that entrepreneurial definition or spirit, but I think it's what makes the good or great entrepreneur is having that discipline. And before you take that big risk and start that new company, you really understand what the risks are and what the opportunities are, and think it through, and also don't get ahead of your skis in terms of the growth. And I know with my company, we've grown, I think, at a measured pace. Obviously, we've got to a point beyond what I'd ever imagined now size-wise, but it was over over a 30-year period, and thinking it through, being able to be in a position that when those downturns come, you can weather it, being prepared for those downturns. So anyway, that's kind of just general thoughts on the entrepreneur and the great entrepreneur.
How about you, Rick?
Yeah, so yes, I think I'm an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. And it's been probably most of my life now staying in the entrepreneurial role because as we've gotten bigger, we run about 35,000 units now, probably $7 or $8 billion of property, plus my health stuff. And we work with endowments and foundations and pension funds. You can really get sucked into being in administration and a leader. So I have a really strong team, and really I work on buying deals, selling deals, and raising equity, and then comp for about 15 key people and run the acquisition group. And that's been a really hard choice, even that I don't even office with any of my main people, so I'm basically virtual on the road. And it's not always easy to let other people do their jobs and not get involved, but I feel like I have to stick at what I'm good at, which is finding deals and raising money and selling deals, and not get sucked into the insurance comp or the ESG factors that are that. So I have to lead with that. But I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I really started with my own capital and then a syndicator and then doing club deals. And we've done 10 full discretionary funds now, and we're our 11th. So it's evolved over time, but I do think it's really hard not to get sucked into not being what you're good at and getting to run a giant company, and I've really fought to keep you doing what you're good at.
So I see you guys are kind of nodding when he says that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I see that you others are nodding when he's saying that, so I'm assuming that.
Yeah, I think my nodding was really just being able to release aspects of having the people that you trust and trusting them to do it, because again, I started as with a part-time assistant and did everything. And as we've grown, it's not been easy to release a lot of the duties, the reviews, but it's just impossible not to do that. So I think in order to be a successful entrepreneur, you need to have that ability, most of all, to get the right people in your organization that'll handle those things, but also to trust them to do it and to say that I do not need to review everything. As Greg mentioned, and we've done a lot of deals with Greg's company. They're a great company, and they are particularly good at acquisitions and doing it. I know Greg leads up that group, and you have to do what you do well. You have to get the right people in the organization and let them do what they do. And again, we need to have enough of a oversight or review to understand what's going on. But by the same token, it's those people that are better than you at doing certain things that you need to let them do those things. And that's the only way that you could really continue to grow, is by kind of releasing a lot of what you would like to do and see and getting the right people to do it.
Mark, how about you?
I thought I was an entrepreneur at age 14 when I formed Marco Maintenance with myself and a couple of guys on our wrestling team. And that was a fun experience, doing rough and finish cleanup in a little town in Pennsylvania. And what I learned over the ensuing month, that's now 50 years, of over 30 business formations and new companies, is that there's a lot that I don't know. And when I let my ego really dictate the business plan and the strategy, I've made plenty of mistakes. And then what's happened is my primary focus was always real estate, and then I made a series of mistakes that I think are pretty common, and that is a few successes got to my head early on, and I strayed from what I knew best, and I went into private equity. And I thought that, geez, if I could be successful or moderately successful in one particular area and one particular focus, I could be successful in other areas as well. That was a pitiful mistake, and I learned, luckily, early on that as our fellow panelists have said, it's really good to focus on what you're good at, and then hopefully you're good at what you're passionate at. And a lot of times there's not an intersection necessarily between passion and what you're good at, but in the perfect trifecta, you're good at what you're passionate about, and you can carry that forward with a laser-like focus and achieve some moderate amount of success.
Mark, I want to follow up on one thing you mentioned. You started Marco?
Marco Maintenance.
Marco Maintenance. 14, and there's a belief that I subscribe to that behavior is kind of baked into you at a very young age. So, and I'll start with you. Do you recall, how you were raised? What existed in your early childhood that may have caused you to become entrepreneurial?
I remember it like it was yesterday. My mom was an immigrant from Hungary, and so she moved over to Pennsylvania and was married to my dad for about 25 years. And then one day we came home. I was 13, and my dad was gone. Where's Dad? He was a college professor. And just kind of a note on the mirror. I'm out of here, and good luck. So I said, I better get to work, because we've got groceries to pay, we've got mortgage to pay. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and so I figured I better get to work and make some money. So after a relatively short period of time, we started Marco Maintenance, had 8 guys working for me, and I was making $2,700 a month. And that was in 1970 or 1969. So it helped, and it was kind of a big push forward, and it was a lot of fun because I got to be a team leader, and I like to lead people, and then that was really the impetus. That, along with a lot of encouragement from my mom and my dad as well. So when you put your mind to it, you can achieve great things. So just stick to it a discipline, work hard, make sure you do a little bit of schoolwork, but stick to your business plan.
We appreciate you adding.
We appreciate adding that. We are at a university.
Rick, what about you in your early life? Anything that influenced you?
I started to work when I was in 4th grade. I started selling seeds door to door. My parents were, my mom was married 4 times, and my second father ended up winning the World Series of Poker, but he was really a bookmaker, and he was like the biggest upset winner, and when he won that, he was broke. But I always had to earn my own money. I always had to kick in. I started detailing cars, worked in restaurants. My mom was always pawning me off to my grandmother, who was from Hungary and Austria, and she was just a hard ass. I was a reasonably great athlete as a kid, and was the ball boy for the local high school and loved sports. And both my parents never came to not one game ever. They just didn't care. If I worked, I got accolades, and so I was always really focused on work. And it came really through a lot of hard breaks. We went on a crew picking berries, and my cousin from Washington, I was from California. We were in Oregon. These kids were brutal who we worked with. So a lot of what I learned to do and how to make money was things I didn't want to do. And I knew that picking berries and then picking fruit and then moving irrigation pipe, all piecework getting paid by what you did, you were really limited to what you make. And I'm like, oh, when I sell seeds, I can make as much as I do. And then I got into car detailing, and I've never had a salary job. And I tried to get some when I graduated from San State, but I've never had a job where I got a salary. I've had restaurant jobs where I got a base minimum wage and made tips. But in my entire career, I've never had that, and but always detailed cars, worked in restaurants, sold Fuller Brush, and always had money in my pockets. The only time I was really ever broke was in college and the first 2 years out of college. That's the only time I had more money in high school, I felt like. Entire life.
Those are obviously 2 very interesting stories. I'm anxious to hear the other 2. Mark?
Yeah, I think my kind of entrepreneurial spirit really just came from my family. So I grew up, my parents owned a kind of luncheonette diner. This was in New Jersey. And they probably opened that when I was about 4 and had it for 20 years. And I think the mindset of the family and my parents, and probably back to the grandparents, was not that you get a job, but you get a business. And I think with that, that kind of translated to me of, you're not constrained just to what's the best job, it's really what's the best business out there. And I think going back even to my grandfather, he came over, I heard the stories from Poland, went to Montreal, and the story is, within a few months he sees a storefront in the neighborhood, he goes to the person and says, is it okay if I can convert this into a little grocery store? And the next thing you know, he's got this grocery store, and a year later in 1920s, he's got 2 cars, a successful business going. And again, I think it's just that mindset of, where's the opportunity? What's the business? Not, where's my next job? I spent a lot of time working in my parents' business. It wasn't huge, but it was successful, and they worked hard at it. And again, I think it was just kind of a work ethic type thing. And they both, my mom and dad, put in a lot of hours in the restaurant, kind of left me a little bit growing up on my own, which I think actually was good in that it kind of made me independent, made me think on my own. And I know today we see with the kids, and before they go to college, they got the counselors and the oversight. I mean, I was on my own, I think, from a pretty young age. And again, seeing kind of the business, seeing the environment, kind of getting that mindset of, the opportunities aren't your next job, it's, where's the business and what makes sense. And I think that's really what kind of drove me more to really saying, what should I do, and what's the best career path for me.
So, both my parents came from extremely modest means. Neither one went to college, but my father became a very successful car dealer, had a number of car dealerships in upstate New York, and so when I grew up in a town of 30,000 people, and everybody knew who my dad was, and I was proud to have that last name of my dad, right, and see the impact of that he had on the community, the people that he employed. And my parents had a great work ethic as well. I mean, I had a newspaper route, I washed cars, mowed lawns, I worked at a gas station, did construction work, worked at the mall. Working at the mall back in the early 80s was super fun. All my friends worked at the mall. It was, but so I always worked but I always, saw what my father had built. I decided I didn't want to go into the car business. After college, I ended up moving to New York City, and I was working as an analyst in investment banking group at Merrill Lynch, and I had no affinity to that business, and I couldn't, in any regard, imagine an entrepreneurial venture that I could have in that industry. But I used to look out my window and I would watch an office tower that was getting developed go up across the street, and I thought, wow, somebody's the general contractor on that, somebody's the developer, somebody's leasing it, somebody's financing it, all the different touch points that real estate has into that big structure that was going up across the street. And I was like, I don't know exactly where I will end up in the real estate industry, but I know that there's lots of entrepreneurial ventures for me associated with real estate. And it seemed like a fragmented industry, and local knowledge would make a lot of important connections for you. So I think that was sort of the trigger on, okay, and I could explain it to my mother, I thought, if I was working in the real estate industry. And I look back at my wife and I raised our kids and, made them work, and there's summer jobs and jobs in high school, and there's been a little bit of complaining about, my friends don't have to work. And I always look at them, I'm like, well, what a travesty for your friends not to have that experience, to go through high school and have a work experience. You pick up so much. And I tell my kids, like, how many stories have I told you about my working as a kid that I still tell you today? So, like, all these, when you get out of college, your first jobs, all the stuff you go through to the students that you're like, this is ridiculous. I tell you what, you look back on them years later, and those are important touchstones in your life.
Seth, I think everybody that buys, on this panel, that buys property and enhances that property so it can function better in its particular geographic neighborhood. Anybody that buys real estate and improves it, whether it's a value-added piece of real estate or a core plus asset, is by definition entrepreneurial versus an institutional fund manager, let's say at an investment bank, that buys core property. It doesn't really enhance the value, doesn't really improve that property, but just sits on it for a yield for its institutional investors. But I think every one of us here acquires property to improve it so it can function better in its particular neighborhood, and as a result, improve the neighborhoods around the buildings as well.
So that's a good lead-in, Mark, to my next question, which is, obviously there's a higher degree of risk with that approach. So talk to us a little bit about, I mean, everyone believes that entrepreneurs have a higher tolerance for risk. So how do you view risk? How do you manage risk? Do you ever feel like you bet the farm on anything? I mean, that's always a belief too, that entrepreneurs are ready to bet the farm. So talk to us about how you manage risk.
Well, I think that there's inherent risk in any type of investment. Even a bond has risk depending on the credit rating of the bond. And when we're buying real estate equity, some of us buy real estate debt as well. There's a whole series of risks, but it's up to us as investors to defease that risk as best we can. And how do we defease or lower the risk through a series of processes? At least with our various firms, we have a really arduous, comprehensive due diligence process where we try to lower the risk before we acquire an asset or a portfolio of assets. We do that through a step transaction, going through checklists, and we also spend a lot of time working on the definition of downside versus threats. So a typical SWOT analysis, if you're buying a business or buying a real estate asset, includes strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Well, there's a difference between threats and downside risk. So there's an overlap, but a threat is something you really can't control. And a threat could be a hurricane, it could be a act of insurrection, but there's lots of different threats that we have to be aware of and underwrite for what we can't see around the corner. And then we also put together a series of downside iterations which stress test our assumptions. And our belief system when we look at a portfolio or a piece of real estate is we believe nothing. And we try to kind of work up and prove up the set of assumptions that the underwriting team has put together with a mantra, always an overriding mantra, which is lose no principle. We don't want to lose principle in any event. So that's really kind of it in a nutshell for us.
Greg, for you, you're at the tip of the spear on the acquisitions and oversee the company. How do you monitor and underwrite risk?
Well, I think what we've always done is really had a two-step process where myself and the acquisition team can tie up any deal, but our CIO's job is to stay unemotional and to do all the due diligence, can't kill any deal. That's worked really well for us. It's not perfect. We've had headaches over the years. We've done 550 apartment buildings, sold 450, so every deal's not all run, but the majority have done really well. But I think you have to have people like me that are positive, that want to do deals, that see the potential in something. And then I think it's really good to have people that are more negative, more bean counter type people that really get in and really do due diligence and go through all the checklists, which is not my personality. I think the other thing we strongly believe in is a lot of groups have their acquisition people who, a lot of acquisition people tend to be in their mid-20s to late 30s because they travel a lot and they cover a lot of ground and it's a lot of social stuff. a lot of them are like me, they're deal guys, they want, or, you know, ladies, and they wanna make deals, and they get paid a lot of times on doing deals. And a lot of groups let their acquisition people, do due diligence, and we have that completely separate, because I think that when you're getting paid on something, you have a vested interest, obviously, to see it, and that's something you get, deal like this. I mean, one of the things I don't like is when I say, I don't see the deal before me, because then he tends to be more bullish, and I really want him in that negative, his normal negative attitude. He tends to get very positive, and like, when I kind of take that role and say, okay, if you like the deal, here's why I don't like the deal. But you can't stop all risk, I mean, there's just too many moving parts. And we really limit our risk, because we probably paid more prepays than anyone in the history of real estate, because, you know, I was around, you know, coming out and doing my internships at private ledger in the early 80s when people get 50% of a bond, and I've seen high interest rates when I was a kid, so I'm always worried about raising rates. Also, people worried about the availability of capital. You know, even in apartments, in 09, you get loans come due, you know, everyone was using higher cap rates and higher debt coverage ratios, you know, less capital. So I've always wanted to add term to my deals. I've always wanted to not do things in 3 years, you're a bullet. If you don't do X, Y, Z, you're dead. So we paid, even on our new development deals, we've always paid a huge premium to get a mini permit at the end. And a lot of times we don't use that one. And then we pay for hedges that a lot of times we don't use. But I'm happy to give up, say I've got a 15% gross margin, I'm happy to give 10% of that to know that the deal's gonna work if rates go up. And not many people are. I mean, most people underwrite things for perfection, and they're willing to use the lowest adjusted rate debts, and so they're giving the money the whole and pray. I'm kind of beyond that. I really want to know that if things don't go well, that we're still going to survive. I don't like Mark. I don't like losing principal.
Mr. Gleeman?
You know, similar sentiments. I think what we really like to focus on more than the upside is the downside of a deal. And we'll do stress testing as to how much revenue could go down before it hits kind of a break even, and really look hard at that. In general, I think the way our firm has worked and has grown has been kind of a very conservative, cautious way. We are basically in the 5 western states, so we're in essentially about 10 major MSAs, and we feel like we know those extremely well. So when we go into and look at a deal, by understanding, by having properties in all of the MSAs already, you know, we have, I think, a leg up on the guys that are all over the country and doing a deal, you know, in Chicago, and then one in Florida, and then they're maybe doing apartments and industrial and retail. So we focus strictly on apartments, strictly in the 5 western states at 10 MSAs, and as we've grown, we will add a market at a time, and before we buy in that market, we'll spend a good couple years really exhaustively studying, looking at every deal that goes out, and before we actually buy our first deal, we've underwritten and looked at numerous, you know, deals in that market. Also, by having in-house property management, I think it gives us a leg up understanding and knowing the operations and what those operational risks are in those markets. And then also on the debt side, as Greg mentioned, we also are typically a 10-year fixed rate buyer, and it does many times put you at a point where you're selling and you do have those prepay penalties. But again, it takes that interest rate risk off of the table. And again, I think is significantly reduces the risk, you know, to our investors. So again, I think the key is really knowing your product, knowing your markets extremely well, focusing more on, you know, what the downside is, and really just exhaustively reviewing, you know, those properties and understanding what that downside risk is, and, you know, again, having that discipline, similar to what both Mark and Greg said, that we will never, you know, lose any principal, and, you know, we as a firm never have, and, you know, we're obsessed with, you know, never having, you know, any deal lose any money.
Okay, so I think my risk profile is a little bit different. So when I started my company, I know we all took this entrepreneurial jump. When I started my company, my wife was here was pregnant with our second child. Our first child was 2 years old, and a mortgage payment, student loan payments, car payment. I think I had about 7 or 8 months of money in the bank of living expenses. I thought, this is a good time to quit my job. And I remember calling my father-in-law, who was a very conservative, very risk-averse person, and explaining to him, like, good news, Hal, I started this company, and I've got this idea and this strategy, and I sort of puffed it all up, and he was like, that's great, and I hung up the phone. I thought, boy, that went pretty well. And about 5 minutes later, he called back and he goes, I've thought about what you've told me, and my daughter is pregnant. You don't really have a plan. But I looked at it, and I was, so I look at, risk, what's the symmetry of the risk? And at that point, I was like, my downside is, I make this effort, it doesn't work out, and in 5 months, I go get another job. And I figured I was pretty employable, so I could go get a job. But my upside, the asymmetrical nature of it was like, hey, this could be a lot better than anything I could do with a job. And that sort of proved to be correct. Then, when I started my real estate career after grad school was when I got into real estate. My timing was perfect. I got into the real estate industry right in time for the savings and loan meltdown, right? So, like, all my classmates were like, you're crazy, you're leaving a job on Wall Street to go into an industry that's in meltdown. And I'm like, yep. But it was a great training place to go see, and to just go see like how terrible everything could be in the industry, right? All the disasters. I spent 3 years underwriting portfolio after portfolio of big REO assets and loans that have gone bad, and we got to sort of realize, oh, there's lots of wreckage. You can make mistakes that really could take you down. I think having that in the back, in the front of your mind of like, okay, I see that things can go bad, and as I start now my entrepreneurial journey, I'm going to keep in mind that the expected case is not always positive, right? So then, so how do you make your investment decision, being thoughtful, remembering that, hey, I've seen wreckage and I know that can come back. But the other thing I think that's a little bit different maybe on my risk profile is over my course of my company, we've changed dramatically, wholesale changed what our investment focus is. We started off buying multi-tenant commercial real estate, did that in the late 90s. Things got real competitive. We started looking at home building in California and thought, this home building seems starved for capital. It seems like there's some good returns to be had by putting money with these private builders and developers to build houses. So we actually just threw away our entire business plan and morphed the company completely to being a capital provider for home building and land development. And we did that and had pretty fortunate timing. And then sort of remembered that things could end in tears. Years later, somebody told me, they said, sometimes when something grows like a weed, it turns out it's a weed, right? So we said, maybe we should back off this home building thing. Fortunately for us, in 2004 and 5, we started just like running the portfolio down, and I basically wound out that entire business and didn't really have a great, we were thinking, well, maybe those pieces, maybe a 15% correction will come back and we'll be bigger into this space. Well, there was a correction, but it exceeded any thoughts I had of how big it was going to be. But so we spent, a year like thinking, okay, well, that business plan's gone. Like everything that I built up, that's gone to, we're not coming back to this space again. So what's sort of the next pivot? And then we pivoted into being a principal and buying residential land in California, and we did that for a while, and then we said, okay, we bought enough land, and we pivoted again. So the risk profile of the way our company is run is we have traditionally been willing to just wholesale walk away from our main business focus and pivot into something new. And it's exciting. It's fun. I spent a lot of time learning a lot of stuff, which I like, and it's worked out.
So you're just looking lots of pivots, No real pivots. No real pivots. For the most part.
I'd say we really pivoted because we went from an owner-operator to a syndicator to club deals. to-
Okay, but always in multifamily, though?
No, I've done lots of
Oh,
stuff.
okay,
But
And-
thank you for me.
What about you, Mark?
I'd say I pivoted quite a bit, but my main raison d'etre has been to align myself with great teammates and then empower and embolden them and work with them. And that process and that story has gone along the lines of different asset classes. So I've been involved, luckily, in the formation of a couple of different companies, and a warehouse distribution business, a retail shopping center company, and then a lending business, and then a European airport development company, and a warehouse and office business in Europe. But with each one of those different companies, there is a skilled set of team leaders and team members that I'm fortunate enough to work with. But what I've heard from a fellow panelist is that, and so I pivoted a little bit, mainly pivoted with individuals and ideas rather than pivot inside our company itself. But what I've heard is that there's risk defeasance or risk control is a local, besides having the checklist and everything. I think people here, especially the students, really want to hear about how they can get started in a business and what kind of risks are they taking. And so one thing that I heard from Mark, which I think was really important, is we can have checklists, we can have lots and lots of empirical systems in place, but there's nothing like getting out and understanding the neighborhood, understanding every single street corner, understanding every single building. If you're in the building business, you should really own the neighborhood, really know it better than anybody else. And I think that's what I heard from Mark earlier, which was really important. Get out there, understand what you're doing, understand the neighborhood, understand every single building, and then you can go through your checklist, and they make more sense, more cogent, when you have a very, very good understanding of the market that you're getting into. And you can gain that understanding by talking to people, talking to community business directors, the Chamber of Commerce. It's not just pounding the pavement, it's talking and learning, understanding everything about the market that you identify.
I'm going to go to some of the questions. We've got a lot, and we're not going to get to all of them, so I'm going to kind of combine a couple here. One question, what is your biggest hardship? What was your biggest hardship throughout your career that you felt made you a better either business person or entrepreneur? And I'll combine with the question of what risks in your particular area do you see going forward? So, Mark, why don't we start with you on that one?
Okay, as far as probably the toughest time or hardship, obviously the 2009-2010 period was challenging. We unfortunately made it through without losing any properties, but we're kind of faced quickly with properties that were negative, and how do you handle that? How do you deal with it? We never really before had in our history gone back to investors and said there's a cash call, which we had to deal with on a couple properties, had to renegotiate at least one portfolio with the lender. So we were able to successfully work through, and I think part of it is our history and our strategy of protecting that downside. So I think relative to most of our competitors, we were far better off, but kind of facing those challenges. And I think we were very transparent with our investors. We explained the situation, talked to them about it, and again, we're able to make it through with all of our properties. But that was probably the toughest hardship. So what was the second part?
What do you see on the horizon? What are you worried about?
Oh, as far as issues. Yeah, and I think particularly in multifamily, obviously it's got a lot of press recently, is the rent control issue clearly is adding a risk profile to the apartment industry now. I think I don't know if it's signed yet by the governor or not, but clearly it will be signed in California. The new rent control, you look at it and it's 5% plus CPI. Oregon did 7% plus CPI in and of itself, it's probably a relatively small impact immediately. But the question is this the trend? Are they going to come back next year and say, okay, now we're 3% CPI plus CPI, or we're just CPI, which then clearly would have a significant, impact on the industry, certainly on our portfolio. So again, I think the whole rent control, government, regulations is a significant risk, for sure right now. I do feel, being in multifamily, that tends to be the safest property type in real estate and a little bit more recession resistant than other types in terms of people always needing kind of a roof over their head. But again, I think today, that rent control is probably the biggest issue that would concern me going forward.
I'm going to ask you to just elaborate on one other thing, Mark. Any lessons learned going through that 09, 08, 09, 010 that?
I think it's, being transparent with your partners, with your investors, and I think we handled it well, and we do the same. I know our most, challenging properties where we had the portfolio, where we did a discounted payoff, renegotiated the loan. We brought in all the investors, had 2 meetings, explained what was going on. We put a lot of our own, cash in terms of the cash call. So I think really the key lesson I had is just to be upfront with the investors. Don't hide anything. Let them know what's going on. And I think that's the best way to face it. When we did our cash call, we did it kind of on an optional basis. If you didn't participate, you were pretty much diluted. You still had a ownership interest, and you weren't kicked out. But by, I think, being transparent and having the meetings and being open with them, we had about a 92-93% participation rate on the cash call, and we made it through. And at the end of the day, we've actually sold that portfolio just about 2 years ago. We ended out at the end of the day with a 5% a year return, which is not one of our proudest ones, but what could have easily been a total loss. By working through it and having the investors work with you, we turned into at least a modest gain. So I think the biggest lesson was just to, again, be transparent and open with your investors.
Greg, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's funny because I take what Mark says, I take what Mark said, both Marks, and really 04 on, we couldn't find a buy, and so we had a really good track record, and so all the endowments and foundations were coming to us trying to give us money, and I said, look, I think in 07 or 08, it's going to crash, everything was really highly leveraged, so because of tax reasons, I did deals with a lot of young guys, so I was really the LP, but because of tax reasons, to make my exchanges work, I had to go on loans, and I was passive. I was building mini storage, I was doing land entitlement deals, and I was surfing a bunch, I was coaching my kids, I was home, my wife liked me. Times were good. And about 08, I thought it was time to go out and raise money, and people were all bullish about it. And then I could just start getting a sense, things were not going away. We sold down to about 10 or 12,000 units. And then all of a sudden all our partners started coming to us, and we had a lot of club deals. Some people I would never do business with again, and they all started cutting our fees. And so all of a sudden, all my partners, the people who work with me, that always thought they should have more, they want their 250 grand or 400 grand or whatever they got, whatever Sally got. But also I started looking at the negative was going greater and greater, and then the cash calls started coming, and my partners quickly fleet. So all of a sudden I was dealing with the banks because I had liquidity, and that liquidity, which was a lot of cash for me, was going out $2-3 million a month between keeping my company going and paying down lenders. And so I went through a lot of cash, and at the same time, 09 happened, and all the LPs that thought they were going to do the next fund, and we thought we'd have fees for that to keep the team together, they weren't there. So I'd say 09 was really the hardest time, and really I didn't do anything, and it was just having bad partners, people that renegotiated fees, and one of the partners had made 8 times their money in 12 years, and then they came back and wanted to cut fees, I'm like, I'm going to have to let them go. We don't care, we need to survive. I'm like, well, we weren't complaining when you made 8 times your money in 12 years. But that was probably the hardest time for me, 09. And 010, I just kind of freaking got it together, and we raised our 3rd fund and started investing again. But I went through just a tremendous amount of cash, paying my people and paying down loans. And I think the lesson learned for me was I became more of a private equity guy. I was putting money in other people's deals, and things like I didn't understand maybe storage, land entitlement. And I think I learned the more I kind of stick to what I know and what I can control. And I also I think doubted, even though we would do personal guarantees in our own portfolio, going to personal guarantees on other people's deals put me in a really precarious position. So I learned a lot of lessons there. And the other thing is we never would have grown as big as we had because I was fat and happy, meaning things were great. I had money to do other people's deals. I wasn't thinking to get as big as we had. So I will say this, but my biggest failure when I time and not watching things, that led to my biggest success because I went into a choice. My back was against the wall, and I had to grow my way out of it. I don't think I would have done it otherwise.
Anything you see on the horizon that you're concerned about? Or what do you see on the horizon that causes you concern?
I'm scared every day. I mean, you were 10 times when you're a kid before 12th grade, and you're going through a litany of fathers, some are cool, some aren't. Hey, you just tend to be a fearful person. So I mean, look, besides my, my kids, right? A couple of of them. Besides worrying about my kids, I worry about interest rates. I worry about supply. I worry about liquidity. I mean, it seems with the trade thing, something's going to happen at some point with the stock market. I mean, you saw the FedEx, their earnings are way down, and I think that's a precursor to other people's earnings surprises. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that make you fearful, but in the end, when I started this business in the early to mid 80s, apartments were 50 grand a unit, plus or minus. By 90, they were 100,000 a unit. By 95, they were 150. By 2000, they were 200. 2010, they were, before 09, they were probably 250. And another 400,000 a unit. Over time, if you're in a good area, we'll go up. So we get our investors, why would you invest now? Like, well, the fear. I mean, I think over time, if you have long-term debt, that's what kills you. If you've got debt due in illiquid time, 21 and 22 are the bad years. You got a lot of 3 and 5 year money, and you bought at the top of the market, and you've got a guarantee or you've got a low debt coverage ratio, you're going to have problems. So I think that's what we really try to avoid, and that's by extending term, by paying pre-base, and by going to lenders early and saying, hey, what, we really want to add term. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'm worried that it's 10 years in the party, and trees don't go to the sky. So I'm definitely worried about an adjustment.
Mark, tell us about your journey in those areas.
I think I have the same psychologist as Greg here. I'm not
my wife. She knows everything about me before I know.
I'm not only insecure, I'm anxious as well. And every 10 to 12 years, I really get highly anxious. But I would say that the beginning of my career started in the late 70s. Really came to a head quickly in 1981 when we had 18% interest rates, and that scared the heck out of me. I mean, I was just getting started in the business. I was a leasing broker, and I developed my first shopping center in 1981, and I couldn't borrow any money, and I really didn't have any money, and I couldn't borrow any money. So I said, "How's this going to work?" And luckily, I had some good friends, and there was a way I figured it out. But that was nothing like 1990 to 1993, the resolution trust days. I mean, a lot of folks here hadn't gone through that, but the RTC days were really dark days. Besides the fact there was no liquidity, there was really no end in sight. Nobody really knew what was going to happen with the government and how they were going to rework the debt situation. So in my mind, that was the first major pivot. In 1981, it was kind of a fun pivot because it was an unusual time, very, very high interest rates, 18, 19, 20%. But I thought there's going to be an opportunity here. I mean, either to buy debt at a discount or there's going to be some opportunity. There's going to be a lot of desperate borrowers. There's going to be something that will present itself. In 1990 to 1993, because we were really at the edge of a cliff and nobody knew what was going to happen next. I didn't have any outlook, and I was getting a little bit scared and desperate at that point. But again, I thought there's still a way to become entrepreneurial. There's still an opportunity out there, and at that point, it was to be a service agent for the banks that were looking for help with their REO assets. So I guess the point is that in good times and in bad times, there's always some opportunity out there. It's just a matter of being flexible, entrepreneurial, which is what we're all supposed to be, and to seize that opportunity without letting fear overcome you and becoming stuck.
I'm going to go to a different question for you, Alex, and this is a question that I've seen a lot on here. It appears that none of you were silver spooners, from what you're telling me. So the question that is being asked is, how did you get the money to get your first deal going? Where did it come from? And that's a question, we get a lot of from the students is, so I think I've got all these great ideas, I want to be an entrepreneur, but how do I raise capital? Where does that come from?
Yeah, I'm not a good test case on what anybody should follow.
That's a good lesson.
Before I started my company, I never owned commercial real estate before. I didn't even ever work at a company that owned real estate before. I had no leasing experience, property management experience, asset management experience. I'd done consulting in the RTC days for a public accounting firm, and I traded mortgages. And then I set this thing up, but I met people along the path, right? So it was nurturing relationships and being very cognizant of in comparing notes. I'm a big believer. I get out of the office a couple times a week, and I always want to have lunch with somebody that I could really learn what's going on in their world and stay in touch. So anyways, friends of mine ended up on Wall Street, and I said, hey, look, I'm thinking about quitting my job and going on my own, and if I found a deal, would you back me? And these guys said, sure. And that was like the summation of the preparation of lining up my capital was, guys that I knew but had never done business with. So I quit my job, took a month off, sat on the couch, read at the stores, came up with got to Capstone, said, okay, there's my company name. And I started calling around. So my buddies were at a big investment bank in New York, in Credit Suisse, First Boston was the name. Now it's just Credit Suisse. And I started calling around, and I started looking for deals, and I was telling people, hey, I've got money from Credit Suisse, I'm looking to buy something. And the first deal I tied up was an enclosed regional mall in the Midwest. Now, mind you, I have zero operating experience. But I got this thing under contract because I told them I got money from Credit Suisse, Capstone Advisors. And they said, people kept going, I think I've heard of you, the company. I'm like, yeah, great, right? So I get still tied up, and I call up the guys at Credit Suisse, and I'm like, hey, I found this deal, and I explained to them, what is it? And I explained to them, it's a 600,000 square foot regional mall. And they're like, let me explain investment committee to you. Like, this is what the process we need to go through to get this deal approved. And I was like, oh, I'll call you back. So, meanwhile, I'm by myself. I'm working completely on my own in a little woody walk up in Mission Valley. But I called around once again through my network, and I found a partner at the firm I used to work at that had a relationship with a company that owned the second largest mall in the United States. So I got these guys to come out and look at the mall, and they signed up for property management and leasing. And then I asked them the value of the mall for me. They told me what they thought it was worth, and I was buying it for considerably cheaper. So then I called back the guys at Credit Suisse, and I said, okay, now I got the Cravco company managing it and leasing it and investing in it. And they're like, we can get that deal done. And literally closing that first deal with these guys was like what turned the spigot on. And I ended up buying 22 more properties with them over the course of 2 years.
So how did it do?
It did fine, it did great. Yeah, it did good. We sold it, and we had a very nice run with the Credit Suisse guys. And then the Russian ruble devalued, and they lost $1 billion back when that was a lot of money. And they decided to stop principal real estate deals, so I had to pivot to a new partner.
I want to say something maybe a little controversial, and that is, you really don't need any money. And I think what you're seeing, to get started, I think what you're seeing up here with this panel is nobody really started with a tremendous amount of money, but I think all of the panelists share a couple of common qualities, and those qualities are absolutely essential if you're going to be an entrepreneur, if you're going to be a real estate investor, and those are hard work, diligent academic pursuit, and being true to your word. Absolutely true to your word. Without those three and other qualities, those three qualities, you can't get to first base. And I think that all of the panelists share those qualities, and because we share those qualities, we've learned one thing, and that's money follows value. Money follows value. And that means that if you go out and you do your homework and you learn a neighborhood, you learn a trade area, you understand value, the value of a piece of real estate, the value of a rental stream, the value of a vacant building, you'll be able to get money. Because as simple as that statement may seem, all you need to do with that algorithm of knowledge and understanding is to go to one of us or anybody, any well-known investor in town and say, I understand the intrinsics of this property, I understand the dynamics of this neighborhood, and here's what I've got for you. Here's what I've got. I've got a value proposition. You don't need money for that. You need to deal with good people that are handshake folks, that are honorable, and money will always follow value. I mean, that's how all of us got started in different forms, but it's the same underlying principle.
So there are a couple questions here that kind of tie into that. Is your decision making intuitive or analytical? It sounds like it's more analytical, but I don't want to respond to that. And as you have gotten more successful, has that changed in terms of how you look at deals? In other words, now that you're more successful, you may be passionate about a deal that may not be as, as profitable, let's say, as other people. Can you follow the analytical side of life, or is there some passion and intuition that factors into this?
Yeah, and I'd say, I think it's really a function of experience and time that make a big difference in that when you've been doing it for 25, 30 years, you can move quicker, you've got the confidence in your decisions, you've got a long history. So I think over time you kind of maybe go a little bit more to that intuitive just based on knowledge and experience. Certainly as the panelists are more successful and have better capitalized, you have more ability to take a little bit more risk because you've got the backstop, and if there are issues that come along, you could deal with those if you are well capitalized. So I think the difference really is being well capitalized, where you've got a little bit more comfort with the downside risk, and just having the experience of many, many years of doing it, understanding it, knowing what you've done, and maybe moving a little bit quicker with that experience.
Greg, what about you? Analytical, intuitive, a little bit of both? How do you come out on that?
I think it depends. On multifamily, like most of the cities lay out, and we started city by city. We started in San Diego, then went to Portland, went to Denver. I'd say on apartments, I pretty much know. If it's tied to one industry, like Seattle's so tied to Amazon, Midland's so tied to oil prices, things like that. then you really get into analytical because you've got so much tying on one industry or one company. I think anything I don't know about, it's super analytical because the only time I really got hurt is when I went to other people's deals because I thought they were good guys and my intuition on the people was good, and they turned out they weren't. So I think analytics is really important for anything I don't really understand. But I also think at this point in my career, I'm really working on stuff I understand. I just want things simple. And I'm willing to take a lower IRR, yes, IRR. I won't take lower returns on my own stuff to know that it's hassle-free. So like I really like service industrial for my own account and to put 15 or 20-year fully amortizing loans on it. I never would have done that in the past, but I'm thinking now for generational wealth, and that changes your mindset, and also risk and tax things that have come up where you've traded and traded, you really don't want that trade to unwind in your lifetime.
This next question I'd like all of you to answer. Give us your thoughts on the state and the state of California.
The weather's really awesome.
And I mean, what do you, from this standpoint, we're hearing stories about diversifying risk, looking outside of California, worried about where the state's going, et cetera. So I can get your perspective on that.
You know, I keep saying I leave here, except I love it so much and we've made so much money here. But, you know, but on the other hand, I'm concerned about the way the state raises its taxes and its focus on just really a very small percentage of people that pay the vast majority of the taxes in the state of California. You know, it's increasingly more difficult to do business here, and sometimes that's good. Like, you know, my oldest son, he's pretty liberal, which is what he's supposed to be in his early 20s, and you know, we had a discussion about regulation, and he's telling me, oh, you know, all the positive things about regulation. I tell him, like, yeah, go ahead and bring it on, you know, because really what you're doing is you're digging a moat around established business, and if I'm an established player, I can deal with all these regulatory issues, and it sort of weeds out competition. He tells me that's not right, but you know, but as much as I like it here, we're definitely been diversifying our holdings out of state, you know, and looking at investing in more business-friendly environments. And also looking at the sort of the cost of housing of California. Really, where does that lead us to in the long term? And the inability to produce housing in this state. Well, I mean, it's really, you know, housing affordability is an issue, becoming an issue across the entire country, but it's no more so than here. You know, so we're looking at sort of the long-term trends of a swing out of these coastal urban areas. To some extent into these more affordable regions that are just a lot easier and more friendly to do business. But on the other hand, the stuff that we have here, you know, the reason cap rates are lower here, it took me a while. It's like, listen, I can buy a deal at a much more generous cap rate in these other markets, and that's cost me the same depending on, so my initial yield is a lot higher in these other markets. Why is that? It took me a little bit of gray hair to realize because NOI growth is so much more dynamic in this market than that market. So there's, you know, as long as that keeps continuing, this is a good place to be.
Mark, how do you view it?
Yeah, no, certainly there's concerns here with the tax structure, with the regulations, but I think when you look at the big picture and see what California has to offer in terms of the weather, the job growth, you know, having Silicon Valley, now LA has their Silicon Beach, San Diego has the biotech and telecommunications. So I know for years, it seems like I have these smart investors come to me, you know, 5-6 years ago and say, I want to do California, you know, it's just terrible tax structure and so much regulations, it's so liberal. And then in the meanwhile, best run we've had the last 5-6 years has been in California. So I think you have to look at the big picture and say, yeah, there's definitely some negative, you know, implications here in terms of regulations, taxes, but then you also say, where do people want to live? And where's it most desirable to live, and where are the jobs and the industries, and where's the great educational institutions that are creating those jobs, and it kind of offsets it. So we as a company, we're probably about 40% California, I'd say, but certainly we're making an effort to diversify and be in multiple states and not overweight to California. And similar to what Greg mentioned, this is where we started, so we tended to get our base here. We know it extremely well. But again, I think when you look at the big picture and all the positives in California, it tends to outweigh the concerns and the issues on the negative side.
You forgot one item that is important to Greg, and that's the surf. So,
No, exactly. Greg knows it better than I.
Yeah, it's funny. Trump was flying around yesterday, so we had to fly in early. So I all of a sudden had my schedule free. So I surfed yesterday in Cardiff, for 5 hours. I got 30 waves. We had 2 kids in lineup. The one I'm going to try to hire. Look, I pay more in state taxes than I do federal taxes. I do a lot of development because it offsets the income from the fund fees because you get 1031. I think people that make a lot of money should pay taxes. I'm kind of like a social democrat, more of a conservative, but I also think we got to pay for infrastructure. I've been to all 50 states. I'm probably one of the few people here that's been to all 50 states. I probably visit 35 or 40 states every year. I'm flying around looking at deals every day, and we own pretty much nationwide. And this is by far the greatest place in the world. I think Hawaii would be a close second if you didn't need the dynamics to live here. But I look at my friends in the Bay Area, and we've got an apartment, and the view of the Golden Gate Bridge. I look at our place in Santa Barbara, and I stayed at the Long Beach Tennis Club last night. Walking around this morning, it was up at 5, and walking around, make my early calls, and to me, the tax is worth it. I have a friend of mine that just sold his company, and he has a $40 million house in Laguna Beach. He's living in Vegas in an apartment for 2 years to try not to pay taxes. I'm like, you're going to save $1 million in taxes, and you're not going to use your $40 million house for 2 years. What's the value on that? So I think you pay to play. I wouldn't want to be anywhere. I've been to all 50 states. I don't think anyone even is close to compared as far as quality people, quality of life. I just wouldn't do it.
I would agree with Greg on taxation if our tax dollars, or at least a good proportion of our tax dollars, went into 501c3 philanthropies, philanthropic or charities. But I just feel like over a certain limit, the government's not doing a great job with investing that capital, and I'd rather invest it and give it away. But that notwithstanding, we've invested in 13 states and 4 countries, and I've got to tell you, California's not so terrible. When you compare it to London, Munich, Geneva, Switzerland, doing business in California is a walk in the park. It's really a walk in the park. And from a taxation standpoint, it's bad here. Well, compared to the rest of the world, it's not so terrible. And so it all boils, in my mind, it all boils down to something really simple, and that's supply and demand. Here we have phenomenal demand, and real estate is all driven by supply and demand. And we have a very, very deep pool of investors, users, and great supply. And so that just leads to wonderful dynamics. And if you're entrepreneurial, as we're supposed to be and are, then that will lead to opportunity, notwithstanding the tax and everything else. And it is a great place to
You
live.
want to comment, Alex, on that? And I like it with you, because that's fine to do.
Yep.
Okay, last item, then we're gonna finish up. 1 sentence advice to graduating students. What do you tell them?
I always tell people the same thing, which is the first job, make sure the first job is with a marquee, as good of a company as you can get into, with the best systems and the best reputation, the best procedures, because that will follow you in a very positive way if you have that.
And I'd say, always look at the long-term, career-wise, job-wise, business-wise. Sometimes it's easy to take the quick route or the most money in the first job, but think of where you're going to be in 10 years and 20 years and what's the best path to get there.
I think the biggest thing is your network of people and your reputation in the business. So, and I also think don't worry about what you make. And I would disagree. I don't think a big company necessarily is good. I think you want to work for someone that's going to teach you, and working for a small guy that puts energy into you is probably more valuable. But I'd say don't worry about what you make and be honest.
So I'm going to just add that the whole mentor issue is important.
I think it's critical. I mean, I learned from guys I liked and didn't like so much about who I am today, from writing things down and checking it off. Yeah, I mean, but those are the lessons that stick with you your whole career.
Mark, piece of advice?
Don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out. Get moving, get networking, put your ideas on paper, study, plan, prepare, but don't be a victim of analysis paralysis. Don't let fear overcome you.
I'm going to put that in our literature. Please, this is for Vince Kunze. Is Vince here? Hey Vince, we'll catch you after for a continuing ed class and for a subscription to the journal. One of our MBA students here, Alan Fleet. Alan here still? Good, perfect. Okay, we'll get to you afterwards. Please welcome me and giving our panel a great round. Thank you again and happy 70th anniversary.
It's not like he's hammering me going, hey, that's some good fun. I think that's really good. Starting out a marketing firm. Well,
I guess I have to right. Yeah. Stay home dad, he's like, open anything.
Hi, Grace.
Hi.
Yeah, but the cool thing is you just flipped the switch and went right back into what you guys do best.
Yeah.
You know, so like that, it was nice to have that plan B.
Exactly, and that's part of like